And it is time for another edition of the AM Time Capsule. This is where we look at an issue 6 months on, and in this edition we look back at what our political panel of ACT leader David Seymour and Greens co-leader Chloe Swarbrick wanted to examine again this year. This is what they said in December.
I'll go rent price inflation. It is one of the drivers of CPI inflation. I mean, you have a lot of promises from the incoming government basically to go to war on renters. We have a wind-back of and a re-imposition of tax breaks for landlords.
A much bigger challenge that this government has to take on and will take on is school attendance. Now, at the moment, we don't have data for term 3. That's something I'm sure that this government will improve the reporting of. But we do have data for term 2. In term 2 of this year, only 47% of kids attended school regularly, meaning that they were there more than 9 days out of 10.
David Seymour and Chloe Swarbrick join us for our final panel with them this morning. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Okay, so two big topics there to address. We'll start with truancy. The term 1 data has just come out recently, 62%. That is an increase on the 60% of the same time last year. It's kind of hard actually to just look in 6-month blocks for truancy stats because you have to compare like with like the year before. So there has been a slight increase, but it is still quite far down on pre-pandemic levels of 73%. Are you happy with those levels, David?
No, I mean, we could sit here and say, well, it's the best term 1 in 5 years. That's true, but it's also so far away from where New Zealand needs to be to have students going to school regularly, getting equipped with knowledge that's going to allow them to flourish so that all of New Zealand can flourish. We've set a target as a government to get up to 80% of students regularly attending by the end of the decade. That's going to be a huge ask considering, as you say, we're at 62 right now. But one of the things we've done is we've actually started publishing the data every day. So right now we can tell you how many students in each region went to school last Friday, and that means that we start to appreciate things like, you know, Fridays are bad. Far fewer students go to school every Friday. We can see that as this term 2 has gone on, attendance has gradually dropped. Some people will blame that on winter illness, but I'm keen to understand why that is. We've also published better public health data so parents can make more informed choices. We've got public information and advertising going out, and we're going to be working on the attendance service, which I don't think is as effective as it could be everywhere. So right across the board, we acknowledge there's a problem, we get the data out, we tell and trust the people with it, and then we start improving everything we do to increase attendance.
Because there are those daily reporting numbers online now, we can see that the rate you need those daily numbers to be at, which is basically 94% to be able to achieve that overall attendance rate of 80%, is not being achieved across any region, and some principals say it's actually not achievable.
Well, that's completely untrue. We know that it's achievable because it's being done in other countries. And if I could get one thing across, you know, we need to recognise quite how bad this situation is. You saw the clip from 6 months ago where I referenced term 2 last year. Only 47% of students regularly attending. Now, you know, you go to the UK, you go to Canada, even America, we often say they have a bad education system. Well, not when it comes to attendance. So yes, what we're aiming for is achievable. It's been done in New Zealand in the past, and it's been done in other countries.
Do you think this was a clever pick from David, Chloe, and that they knew that attendance might slightly improve?
Look, I'm not really interested in getting to the political point scoring on this. I think that's something that all politicians should hopefully agree with, is the importance of our kids attending school and getting access to a high quality education. To that effect, we have all of the evidence that we need. And as I referenced, I think last time we were discussing this issue on the show, there was a cross-party report that came out of the Education Workforce Select Committee about a year or so ago, which even the ACT Party signed up to the recommendations of. And that made really clear that we needed to ensure that we were retaining high quality, locally made school lunches for our kids. kids so that, you know, a lack of food wasn't a barrier to education, but also that we were dealing with the drivers of school non-attendance, particularly those inequitable drivers in particular. So making sure that kids have safe, warm, dry, secure housing, for example, and their parents have adequate incomes, because ultimately that's where child poverty comes from.
Okay, let's look at housing and those drivers then, and what you wanted to look at, which was rent price inflation. We're looking at about 6.5% year on year, so that's still up above CPI at 4%. But there is a slight cooling there, and supply is increasing. We're seeing demand coming down, so it's moving in the right direction, don't you think, Chloe?
Depending on how you look at those variables that are driving precisely that. So you were talking before on the show with Gavin from Trade Me about particularly migration numbers. We also know that there's a ton of New Zealanders, particularly young New Zealanders, who are leaving this country, which is devastating. A lot of them are doing so on the premise not only, of course, of pent-up demand around COVID-19, but of the fact that they believe that they have better opportunities offshore and that there might potentially be lower cost of living. We can achieve better infrastructure investment. We can have a thriving nightlife. We can have communities that people want to invest in here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, if we get the policy settings right. But actually, I would call on David here because he made some compelling points when it comes to the evidence and database that we need to make informed decisions around school attendance, for example. We don't currently have next to any real good, meaningful data around the distribution of ownership of rental properties in this country. And in fact, both Labor and National have kind of had a go at each other for not having these figures, yet not being interested in actually resolving the problem in the first place. So if we were to do that, then we would have far greater insights into also the likes of wealth distribution and inequality in this country. And ultimately, we'd be able to make better public policy decisions.
Do you think that is helpful? Do you think it, David, do you think it would be helpful to know?
No, I mean, this is what we hear, you know, week after week from Chloe, that your problems are caused by someone else's success, and if only we could go after those people or blame someone else for doing well, then we could solve the problem. You know, the truth is that there are two things that need to happen. Number one, make it easier to build a house. The easier you make it to build a house, the more there will be, the more choices tenants will have. Number two, make it easier to be a landlord. The easier it is to own a house and rent it out to another person, the more choice there will be, the more pressure there will be on prices. You know, the basic facts are that in the last 2 years of the previous government, rents went up $200, and they're still going up. We've still got really bad momentum on inflation right across the economy. I accept all that. But what is our government doing about it? Well, number one,
making it easier
management.
to kick people out of their houses with no-cause evictions.
And you know what one of the effects of that is? If it's easier to kick out a bad tenant, then a landlord...
increase rents. Yes, that's what the evidence bears out.
Then a landlord is more likely to take a chance on someone that maybe doesn't have good references, that maybe has a bad history.
There is no evidence for that whatsoever.
You always talk about evidence, Chloe, but just a second.
It kind of matters, David, to make good public policy.
Well, yeah, but you often don't have any. For example, earlier you said that healthy school lunches make a difference to attendance. The Ministry of Education has done 5 reports on that and found no connection. So, you know, you always talk about evidence, you just don't actually have any. So,
if we bring it back
number
to
one,
rent, Chloe,
I'm sorry, what we need to do here, make it easier to build a house, make it easier to be a landlord. Those are the things our government's doing.
So with rent, and you're saying, Chloe, that look at who owns these places, isn't that putting the focus in the wrong place? Does it actually matter who owns the places? Isn't it more about what is happening for those people who are wanting to rent, that prices are coming down, that they're living in healthy homes? You know, aren't you actually looking in the wrong place if you're saying, let's look at who owns those places? Does that matter?
There are 3 key solutions, noting that no one solution is going to fix absolutely everything, but there are 3 key things that the Greens have been campaigning for a really long time to fix the housing market. One is a register for property managers and landlords. We do not have a meaningful backstop to understand who owns these properties, and therefore ultimately how we ensure that we raise the bar of responsibility in order to actually meet the likes of the Residential Tenancies Act healthy home standards. The second is turning those healthy home standards into a rental warrant of fitness, which we've discussed time and again on this show. And the third is rent controls. Bear with me on this, because we currently have within the Residential Tenancies Act forms of rent controls around, for example, the inability to raise rents more than once every 12 months. However, what the evidence shows is that if we move to a no-cause eviction model, then landlords can kick out their tenants in order to increase rents.
I just want to go back to that. I just want to go. Hang on, sorry. I just want to go back to the owners and. Aren't you in saying that that's, you know, owning a property is kind of inherently makes you a bad person in
Not at
some
all.
way? You know,
No.
we want to make sure that, you know, there's a specific type of person that's not owning a whole lot of property?
No, what we want to do is have an informed public debate. Right now, we know that there's approximately 120,000 landlords. We know that there's approximately 1.5 million renters in this country, but we don't have meaningful understanding of who owns what, and therefore, if there are bad actors, how we can raise the bar. No, it's ultimately about creating a public policy environment.
It's a witch hunt, and I'm sorry, but this is the kind of populism that I'm getting tired of. If only we could find some
evidence about who owns what in this country. Surely that is an important thing.
No, because what's important is that we make it easier to build a house, make it easier to be a landlord. And if you want to talk about evidence, Chloe, you guys had 6 years. You beat up on landlords, you put more restrictions on, you put more taxes on. Rents went up $200 in 2 years. That's the evidence, Chloe. Now we're making it easier to build a house, make it easier to be a landlord, so people have choice and prices can come down.
Let's finish on the fact that we wanted to look at rent prices, rent price inflation. It is still increasing 6.5% per year. That's the top line. But I want to ask you just one more question, Chloe, around the Darin Tana investigation. And I know we have asked you this many times, and we've asked you many times because the inquiry has taken 15 weeks now since it was announced. And every time I know you say that there is little that you can say on it because it's an independent inquiry. I get that and I understand why you say that. But also how much money, how much taxpayer money has been spent on this? And is that something that frustrates you, that so much time and so much money has been spent on it? That is something you can comment on.
Something which I can definitely say is that I am really looking forward to unpacking this with all of the due public scrutiny and accountability when this investigation and its independent expertise is concluded, because it is in no one's interest for us to open that can of worms and therefore to put a finger on the scale such that we end up with anything less than robust conclusions, which I can then make robust decisions upon moving forward. So I'm really looking forward to getting into it as soon as we have that report.
Do you know how much taxpayer money has been spent on this?
So it's been relatively publicised, the fact that the first 2 invoices were paid through our Green Leaders Office. Obviously, that's something which there is discretion with every single political party leader's office. But with discussions with the Speaker of Parliament, it made decision to shift that burden onto the Green Party itself.
But there has been a significant amount spent, and also Darin Tana is still being paid each week. Innocent until proven guilty, yes, but it's been 15 weeks since
Totally. And again, to that effect, will absolutely be held accountable and expect all due scrutiny on that. But again, unfortunately, the reality is that with natural justice being the priority here, we have to wait for the conclusion of that investigation. After that, ask me absolutely everything.
Okay. Paddy.
I think so. I was just going to say, is it true that she's now been suspended longer than she was an MP?
That's true, right?
Yeah, again, ultimately, these were very deeply serious allegations and we had to respond with the requisite seriousness.
Party leader David Seymour and Green Party co-leader Chloe Swarbrick, just want to thank you both very much for the time that you've given us on AM. We really appreciate it.